Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are in Wompat Gulch playing as the Empire against the forces of the Vampire Counts. And so in this matchup, I did want to try out the Luminarch. I don't often take this artillery piece into games, but I really wanted to give it a shot here. There will be a second game right after this one that I also want to demonstrate, but because this was a little bit of a short one. But I did want to try out the Luminarch, and one of the things, kind of a general rule I follow against Vampire Counts is don't bring shooting against them. Especially now that the Mortis engine has been nerfed, the Vampire Counts don't have that many tools to make them really good in melee, or make them really threatening in melee. And you can usually sort of force out a Claw of Nagash or Mortis engine or those sorts of things, force them away with just your normal sort of heavy-duty Lord on a big flyer, or heavy cav, or that sort of stuff. Monsters, of course, if you're playing as Chosen. And you can kind of deny them that way. So I figured, normally I don't really bring too much in the way of shooting, just because they get shut down so easily by zombie summons, by bats, by dire wolves, by cav, all this sort of stuff. The vampires just have so many interfering units. The only really, if you're bringing shooting against, I think there's only a handful of factions where I think it's really necessary or really worthwhile, usually either because it's so cost efficient or because you just don't really have too many other options. I think Wood Elves, for example, is good, but or if you're bringing like a skirmish cav, it can work, just because then you can run away, especially from zombie summons, which are the main shutdown. But I did bring the Templar Luminarch here, which has a lot of burst. And it can kind of move around. It's got 50 speed, so it can kind of book it if needed. So Temple of Luminarch, it also does have a net, three charges on that, and that's really the core and heart and center of this army. If you're doing cheese builds like this one, you want to go with, or sort of single point gimmicky builds like this one, you always want to have a decent remainder of your force. It's not good to sort of go overkill with cheeses and then not have enough of a decent remainder. So I did bring a whole bunch of greatswords here. You can see 3 units of them. They're backed by the Sigmar Sons, 2 spears on the flanks, so a little bit of a holding force, and the greatswords can slide out with vampire infantry very well. A Jade Wizard for the heals. Boris Todbringer up in the sky with all of his upgrades, except of course Foeseeker and Deadly Onslaught, and then the Royal of Griffites, as well as normal Demigriffs with Halberds, which gives me a very solid, flexible, armor-piercing anti-large core, which you need to deal with heavy-duty stuff like Blood Knights and Black Knights and that sort of stuff. But you can see already the Temple of Luminarch charging up here to take a shot at the Mortis engine. Now my opponent here didn't go too heavy on easy, big targets for me. But the Mortis engine there, taking a big meaty hit. If we look at its starting HP, it started at like, what, 5,400, and it's already lost about 1,600 HP there. It does have regen and all that sort of stuff, but nonetheless, that is a very brutal hit. My opponent already sending his bats to try to shut down the Luminarch, but one of the cool things about the Luminarch, and honestly about shooting units in general, is that if you put them on garden mode, they'll keep shooting even if they're being swarmed. So one of those important little tricks to keep in mind. I'm just ignoring those bats, and I'm planning to run them over with the cavalry. In the meantime, the front line's closing very quickly. You can see Graveguard, Stearnsman, Heinrich Kemmler, who's become a bit of a more common pick lately. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's just because people realize Krell's good, and Krell did get a few buffs as well. But he's got Skeleton Summons, he's got Invocation of the Heck. That's actually it, surprisingly. Undeath Resurgent, Cloak of Mists, and Shadows, Chaos Tomb Blade. So, very cheap sort of build for him. Fairly cheap front line with some Feaster in the Dusk and Crypt Ghouls, and some Graveguard in the center, some Skeleton Spears in the back, and then these 2 Blood Knights on the flank, who are really there to dish out a lot of hurt. Now, personally, I don't think the Claw of Nagash is necessarily the most competitive pick against the forces of the Empire. Empire often brings shooting, and these guys kind of shuts down the Claw of Nagash hard. My opponent here does try to get an Invocation of the Heck off, but nonetheless, the Mortis engine definitely has taken quite a beating. 2 shots already putting it down very low. And now, as the lines are about to clash, you can see I'm pushing my greatswords in against the Feasters, pushing my Sigmar Sons, my greatswords over there. You can see we actually do get a meaty connection there on Heinrich Kemmler. I swapped to a second ago. And he does lose about half his HP in a single shot, maybe about a third, but still, very, very meaty shot. And in the meantime, we are pivoting around with our Knights to go after the Blood Knights. My opponent doesn't really have too many targets for his Blood Knights, and this is definitely a bit of a problem for me. You can see him shortly going to retarget Temple of Luminarch, but then Krell comes up, and the Luminarch only has about 3,000 HP, so you don't want it stuck fighting Krell. He'll beat the snot out of it. So quickly we are pulling away, trying to maneuver out of reach there. In the front line, though, the Greatswords will be crushing the Graveguard pretty easily, and this big mistake on my opponent's part, he left his Blood Knights unattended for a second because he was focused over here on his summons, and my Demigriffs get a massive, meaty charge. And this means these Blood Knights are going to get absolutely shredded. I do believe Demigriffs actually cause splash damage on their melee attacks. And you can see these Blood Knights are having an absolutely atrocious day. These guys down 15 models. These guys already down about 10. Getting towards shreds. In the meantime, Luminarch just booking it away from Krell, who is very, very interested in trying to take it down. But you can see these Blood Knights just taking such a whooping. They've already lost like half their models. And Royal of Griffites and Demigriffs in general are pretty grindy cav. They're pretty good in those sorts of protracted engagements. But, you know, my opponent is going to counteract this a little bit. We do get a net here on the Blood Knights, but my opponent gets an Invocation of the Heck off, which will counter the damage a little bit. Fortunately, it doesn't hit these Blood Knights. Here in the pits, though, you can see the Crypt Ghouls are obviously going to be dumpstering. I do believe there's Crypt Ghouls in here. I thought I saw Crypt Ghouls in there. Maybe it's just skeleton. There are Crypt Ghouls. I was about to say, if these spears are losing to skeleton spears, that's kind of sad, but there are Crypt Ghouls in there. They're going to crunch through here, but look at how the Greatsword just dumps through the Graveguard. Greatswords are such a good pick nowadays. I think they're an amazing unit. You can see over here, Boris just diving in on Heinrich Kemmler, applying pressure to him, and of course the Jade Wizard is in here, providing a little bit of support himself. The Greatswords over here will be able to manhandle the Feasters as well as the Graveguard pretty efficiently. It's not ideal, but they'll do an okay job, and especially even they haven't really been supported over there. And then my opponent does get some summons. You can see the Greatswords will decisively win against that Graveguard, and here we're going to be able to take off these Blood Knights, and hitting these Royal Fights with an Overcast Regrowth means that they're going to heal up. They still have most of their models intact, and we're going to be able to wipe out these Blood Knights pretty efficiently. You can see we do pull away now because I didn't want to get bogged down here against the Spears, fighting on top of them and on Krell, which is just disastrous. But at this point, my opponent does decide to simply GG out, which, well, might have been a little premature. Honestly, at that point, the game was basically decided. I still had more than enough Greatswords. I still had 2 very healthy units of Demigrenades. My opponent had basically lost all of his key units. I sniped out the Claw of Nagash with Boris in there. A few little notes. Don't bring a Claw of Nagash or Mortis Ascension against Empire. I don't really think it's worth it. You can easily take Empire on in the Cav game. You can take him on in the infantry game pretty efficiently. You're not at a huge disadvantage in either of those fields, whereas a lot of other factions will struggle in something else, in one of those things. Vampire accounts can take them. They can take Empire pretty efficiently. So as long as you're on top, you're getting your charges with your Blood Knights. So I wouldn't say. Yeah, I wouldn't really recommend this, but you could see just how powerful the Luminarch is. Also, when you're doing builds like this, sort of cheese builds, I'm hesitant to call it a cheese build because I didn't really build. I built the army around the Temploff, but it wasn't like I spec'd all into. I wasn't over-invested into sniping my opponent. But if you're trying to bring these sorts of units that are one-trick ponies, like the Temploff Luminarch, if you try to do Gelt and Double Witch Hunter, you need to make sure the rest of your army is kitted out in a way that they can support that they can cover for you, especially if your opponent doesn't overinvest in the units you're trying to counter with these one-trick ponies. You need to have the backup, and that's why this build is actually fairly generic, with the exception of the Luminarch, which is almost 2,000 invested in this. So quickly, we will be hopping on to another one. Good game to my opponent, Host Malone here. Like I said, I think the main issue here was a little bit of the micro and the choice of the Mortis engine, but we will be hopping on over to a second game just to discuss these things a little further. So this time around we are in Volksgrad, and you can see the sides this time around are switched. I'm playing as the Vampire accounts this time against the forces of the Empire. You guys have most likely seen this build before. It is my sort of, at this point, almost generic composition. It's a kind of a composition I just like falling back against the Empire. Front line is very cheap here. We do have Vladdy Daddy with just a few spells, Raise Dead, Van Hale's Dance Macabre, and Invocation of the Heck. Vlad, with the addition of Arcane Conduit, has become a pretty competitive damage support lord. Before, without Arcane Conduit, he was kind of struggling, but I think that between the buffs, his melee stats that all the Vampire accounts got, or Vampire account lords got, and his buffs to his acquisition of Arcane Conduit has made him a really solid lord choice. I always liked him before, and now I like him even more. But the front line, very cheap. A handful of Stearnsmen and one Stearnsman, 2 Graveguard, 2 zombies just to soak up some damage, and just because I was floating 300 gold that I didn't know where to put. I guess I could put it into chevrons, but I don't know. You know, zombies are cannon fodder. But really, the main killing power here is on the flanks. Vargulf and Blood Knight on both flanks, Dire Wolves on one end, Dire Pack on the other. So a very sort of hefty cavalry contingent. I think this is a great way to play Vampire accounts, personally. You don't necessarily. I know a lot of people like to invest in the flyers. Sometimes I do that myself, but I do think that heavy cav is definitely something Vampire accounts can do well. Blood Knights are just absolutely monstrous, and with their recent buffs, they're just such beasts. 40-40 and 22 bonus first large. I do believe these guys are absolutely ludicrous. Is it 22? It is 22 bonus first large. Which, for comparison, Green Lights I think only have 12. These guys will actually beat Green Lights in a head-to-head. Quickly going over my opponent's composition, though, my opponent decided to go the full cheese here. So, just like I was just discussing about not necessarily going too heavy on cheese, but my opponent here did bring Balthasar Gelt. I don't believe this is a bartered. It looks like a bartered warhorse, but the armor says it's not a bartered warhorse. But the speed says it is. That's really odd. Is there any benefit to having a bartered warhost? He's got trash armor anyway. Well, either way, sorry, I'm digressing a little bit there. But Balthazar Gelt with simply transmutation, the final transmutation, and metal shifting, and his uber amounts of Wind's Magic with Arcane Conduit and Staff of Valance. Alongside that, 2 Witch Hunters stripped down to just Accusation. So going the full pain train here, trying to snipe out my Lord, and basically win the match that way, which is honestly viable against Vampire Counts. Vampire Counts don't have obviously they struggle if they lose their Lord. And they don't have the best leadership, and obviously their units are not efficient without spell support, so this can be pretty potent. One of the little caveats I would have, though, is that my opponent didn't bring a cheap spell. Usually it's good to bring, say, Plague of Rust as a support spell. For his main line, my opponent went pretty wide, but with some oddball units. Great Swords in the center here, 2 Flagellants, so obviously you want that Unbreakable, I suppose. 2 units of Halberdiers on either end, providing some anti-large. Silver Bullets in the center here, providing some supplementary shooting. A steam tank, which is an added layer of, I suppose, cheese. It can do quite a bit of damage over time with its cannon, and it's not a terrible combatant against low-end infantry in melee. But a lot of its benefits, the fact that it has fear, terror, the fact that those sorts of things are not actually that useful against Vampire Counts. So I'm not entirely sure what my opponent was thinking here. Vampire Counts can have some issues killing it, though, so we'll definitely see how that plays out. And then 2 units of Demigryph Knights with Halberds, 1 on either end, and you can see they're already trying to sort of sally out and zone me out. Now, this build is definitely very heavy on the gimmicks here. The 2 Witch Hunters probably about 1,000 apiece. The Steam Tank obviously 2,200. Gelt even stripped down like this is probably about 1,000. So this is probably about 5,000 wrapped up in units that are pretty one trick. And so we are sort of pushing at him. I'm not overcommitting with my cavalry. You can see I'm using this berm here as a screen against the Steam Tank, because one of the nasty things you can see the Steam Tank from over here. He could potentially get a shot down on me, and I don't want it hitting my Blood Knights and losing, say, 4 or 5 models per hit if I pushed out and fought the Demigryphs there. But seeing an opportunity here, obviously not wanting to let it go to waste, I'm going to try to force these Demigryph Knights to fight. You can see here, the Dire Pack actually doing a surprising amount of damage. These guys do have 125 armor, but nonetheless, we're going to get some meaty hits there. They actually lose a model as the Vargulf is charging in. I think they actually lose 2 models, so that's pretty crazy. Dire Pack definitely paying its dues here as we apply some pressure. My opponent here not pivoting his Steam Tank, having basically just been sniping away at, I guess, the infantry, maybe Vlad, just missing. Seeing the Halberdiers in the woods, though, I do decide to pivot away and pull back. But we've already gotten a good chunk of damage on these Demigryph Knights, about 1,000 in, and these guys, of course, do not have any sort of healing, because my opponent didn't bring heals. He's only got 1 spell on Balthazar, so that's a little bit limiting. So Dire Pack losing 1 model, not the end of the world. They're going to pull away, and in the meantime, the cavalry is going to be able to pivot, while the Direwolves jump in and are going to try to tie down the Steam Tank. And this is one of the great things about unbreakable units like this. They're not going to win against the Steam Tank. They're not even going to do a lot of damage, but they'll tie them down and they'll buy us some time. While in the front line, things are starting to go down. My opponent hitting me with a final transmutation, melting down Vlad with a final transmutation and accusation. So Vlad just taking an absolute beating. But fortunately, we do have the Blood Drinker, so we're going to be able to get good heals. I was definitely regretting not bringing the Karstein Ring into this match, but it is what it is. In the meantime, the fight over here is kind of disintegrating into a brawl. You can see the Dire Pack, the Blood Knights, and the Demigryphs. My opponent here, bit of a give and take. My opponent trying to bait me in on top of his Halberds, me trying to bait the Demigryphs away from the Halberds. So back and forth action. My opponent finally does pivot around to go fight the Vargulf, and this is really the opportunity I was waiting for. And you can see we are going to get a nice little meaty charge here on top of all of these Demigryph Knights. And this is really not where the Demigryphs want to be. You can see we are going to be able to shut them down. While in the back line, these Skeleton Warriors zoning out Silver Bullets and forcing them away. In the meantime, Vlad with his monstrous healing is just going to be able to sit in here, debuff these Great Swords, and help his troops win the day. Over on the periphery, in the meantime, these Demigryphs having an atrocious day, and we are sort of whittling down all these units. And of course, the 2 Vargulfs just hitting like trucks in there. The 2 Blood Knights, of course, doing a lot of hurt. And these Demigryphs are actually going to get Terror out of it, which is a big win, and it means that we're going to be able to snowball this flank out of control. At this point, even the Halberdiers are going to snowball out, and now we're going to be able to push in and apply that pressure. Invocation of the Heck and Van Hell's Dance Macabre there providing huge buffs to these units, and just making them absolute beasts. And now, obviously, I wanted to just force these knights away, push them out of the fight as best I could. So that's really what we were focusing on, pursue these guys very, very aggressively. My opponent here does get another final transmutation off. I think Balthazar, it wasn't an overcast though, so it didn't get quite full value there. I think Balthazar can get 3 off, 3 overcast in a game, I think. I could be wrong. This isn't a build I use particularly often myself. I actually basically never use the Balthazar Double Witch Hunter build. I know some people are very fond of it. I personally am not. but I think he can get 3 off in the course of a game if you overcast. So he does quite a bit of damage. Vlad's almost hit his healing cap, so despite his tankiness, he's getting a bit mauled here. I definitely wish I had my Karstein ring before. That would have been a huge, but you can see Accusation going down, melting poor Vladdy Daddy. But in the meantime, in the periphery, we are starting to get our big win here. That's a whole chunk of Demigryphs here forced off the map, and we are going to be able to sort of slaughter these remaining Demigryphs. My opponent doesn't have heals, so big win for me. And now the main mob is going to be able to push into the backline and start applying pressure. This summon unit of Skeleton Warriors is going to be able to bog down these halberds, while in the meantime these knights are going to be able to, and the Vargulf are going to be able to circle around and go for my opponent's backline. With the loss of the Greatswords, my opponent now doesn't really have much to hold. He's got his Steam Tank, which is now being forced into melee. A bit of a mistake there. I don't know why Vlad went in against him. In the meantime, over here, the Demigryph Knights getting wiped to basically to a man. They get swamped by these very angry Blood Knights, and this is really not where Demigryphs want to be. I've really found this is such a useful combo. The Vargulf plus the Blood Knights can really maul basically any combo of cavalry, and with those gone, we will now be able to pull back in and deal with this end of things. Graveguard here slaughtering the Flagellants. You can see the Flagellants definitely doing a bit of hurt, though. How much of this was to summon skeletons, I'm not entirely sure. But we're able to wipe them out, and we'll now be able to sort of fall in against these halberds. Here in the pits, the Steam Tank's still causing mayhem, but with this many infantry, my opponent has now essentially lost his front line. You can see I'm using my troops to wipe out units one by one. These great swords forced off completely, and poor Barfazar here just getting run down by a bunch of Blood Knights, and obviously on the Barded Warhorse he's just getting slaughtered. I think it's a Barded Warhorse, but it just doesn't. The armor's just so bad. I don't know why. You know, I would expect like at least 80 on a Barded Warhorse, but no. Either way, over here we do get shut down the Silver Bullets with the Vargulf, and we're going to be able to pull in once we finish off poor Barfazar over here. We're going to be able to swing around with our Blood Knights and go after the Silver Bullets. Here in the pits, in the meantime, the Blood Knights as well as the Dire Pack forcing down the Witch Hunters, which is going to leave my opponent with just the Steam Tank essentially, and these halberds. Here in the pits, the Vargulf does come chasing after these halberdiers, looking to teach them a lesson. They do have decent melee defense at 47, but the Vargulf's actually got pretty monstrous melee attack of its own, so it's definitely going to be able to lay the smack down on these guys. I'm kind of curious to see. You can see it's just sending those guys flying. Not the greatest kill count there, but it's been doing a great job at just disrupting. You can see that guy just gets pulped. Poor guy. So there's like a bloody smear there left to him. But regardless, the game now is basically just entering an attritious phase as we run down the Witch Hunters. You can see this is one of those things Vargulfs are really good for as well. I like using him as a supplement to my archers. Poor Vlad here, hit by another accusation that I missed, but he's almost dead. But this is one of those other things Vargulfs are good for, running down Witch Hunters and heroes. I overcast on the heck to heal this blob, and it has Suicide Vlad, so big mistake there, but it doesn't really matter at this point as we were running down the rest of my opponent's army. In the pits, the Steam Tank grinding things out with some Graveguard and Sternsmen and Blood Knights, but really the Steam Tank doesn't have a chance against these units. The Steam Tank's not that good at killing in melee. I'm not the biggest fan of the unit in general, and you can see there it does explode to the fists of the Vargulfs and the Blood Knights. So you can see despite the low kill counts, the Vargulfs doing immense work. Blood Knights, immense amounts of work, 3 chevrons apiece, which is absolutely ridiculous. They did a lot of work. Vlad, of course, got sniped out. Now this is one of those things I want to discuss about cheese builds, which is essentially this is a cheese build, I suppose, because my opponent very much overinvested in a single gimmick. If you are investing heavily, if you're trying to go for a certain type of cheese or certain type of gimmick, something that's one trick, make sure the rest of your army is well rounded. Focus around Balthazar and the Witch Hunters, or focus around the Steam Tank. Don't try to focus around both, because they're both pretty gimmicky, pretty one-trick pony units. This is 2,200 gold that could have been invested into 2 greatswords and some more spells for Balthazar. You could have put Balthazar on a normal horse, gotten some more spells on him, gotten some greatswords, and this would have actually probably been a pretty competitive build. I'm not a fan of the halberdiers in the matchup either. They're still kind of mediocre unit despite all their buffs, but regardless, I think the investment here in the Steam Tank was a big detriment. Double greatswords would have made this fight much riskier for me, would have made it much more difficult, because those greatswords could have dumpstered this front line, torn through all these Graveguard, torn through the Sternsmen, and left me with basically no anvil for my cav and my mobile force. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think that's something worth mentioning, that don't go all in on multiple. Don't bring multiple gimmicks. It usually doesn't work all that well. Nonetheless, great game to my opponent, Patty Wampus here, as well as Malone in the last one. I mostly just wanted to do this video to discuss cheesing. how to do it, essentially how to cheese properly, how to use gimmicky units properly. There's quite a lot of gimmicky units that are one-trick ponies, and I don't necessarily consider them a cheese, and I don't necessarily consider them to be overpowered or impossible to deal with or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. You can always play around these units, but if you're trying to make use of these units, make sure that the rest of your army is well-rounded enough or good enough to compensate for that unit's major disadvantages. So nonetheless, good game to my opponents. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I know it was a little lengthy, but I do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below if you've not already. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, anything like that, be sure to share them, and I will respond as soon as I can. As usual, I do appreciate you for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.